Pedro from A&P Reacts. I'm here today with Ihsahn, a man that needs absolutely no introduction, a legend. Thank you very much for taking the time today to join me on this corner of the internet to talk a little bit about your EP.
My pleasure, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
The first question I have to ask you is, after so many years, so many full-length albums, why an EP at this point in time?
Well, I guess you kind of touched on that. I mean, when looking back, I found that I have quite consistently been releasing a full-length album every second year since I was 16, and now I'm 44. So probably on high time to do something else. No, but seriously, I've done 7 solo albums also now, with this project, and I just needed to do something different. To kind of reset the parameters a little bit before I kind of started envisioning another full length, and it's actually been really creative for me, and really opened up some creative spaces that I wasn't aware of, and that probably would not have come to mind if I started focusing on a full length.
One of the interesting things about the EP is that I've heard you mention it, that the EP kind of got started from the cover songs into the 3 original tracks that you created. And when I heard the EP for the first time, I thought the process had been in reverse, because I really felt that the covers really fit perfectly with the 3 original tracks. How was that creative process of going from covers to the 3 new tracks on the EP?
Well, you could say that as with all my releases, or as it's been with my albums since the beginning, at least my solo work, I always kind of write up a sketch work of what kind of album I want to make. So I have kind of sonic references, I have visual references, lyrical references. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with my catalog as such, but I did an album called Arctis, and that all the lyrics, all the images and everything from there was kind of placed within this kind of Arctic landscape. So there's kind of a scene for it, and for this EP in particular, it started off as Heidi, my wife. She is kind of my creative in all, but she's challenging me for a while to do something more, and then it was kind of going back to my roots, musically, and then she suggested that I do it also with no, so then it became very, very rootsy, and then it kind of made sense to focus it in on where my cultural background, my geographical roots, it became very specific. But in regards to that, I want something that also sounded very to my beginnings, that sounded like a rock. And I think that Lenny Kravitz, the aesthetics of his recordings, it had pure rock band aesthetics to it, and the same with, it was also almost a surprise to myself that when I did the Maiden cover for the first time, that it would be something off of the 2 first albums, for the Diano era, because it's no secret I'm a huge later 80s era Maiden, where it became very epic and synthesizers and all that. But it just has this really, that song and that album has such a bare bones, angry young rock metal band production to it, so first of all, I picked the concept of the EP came first, and then I picked those 2 songs as kind of a sonic reference, for what kind of ensemble I wanted to write for. and then I kind of wrote the music to that basic ensemble of bass, drums, two guitars, bass, screaming vocals, and a horn section, because a horn section is always rocking.
Yeah, I thought the two choices were perfect, not only from a musical perspective in terms of how the originals sound like and what the originals represent, but also from the lyrics that those two songs have. I mean, those two songs from a lyrical perspective, they're very black metal.
I totally agree, and of course, Wrathchild, it really comes from that similar young spirit, as I kind of I was quite familiar with, and as I say, in Borknagar is that the message of that is really, part of it is very much the same criticism, the superficialness, the more commercial aspects of the music, that, and you really just want to take it back into, and as I say, it bears very similar attitudes, early true black metal attitude, and and as for the Iron Maiden track, there was also practical detail that I wanted to song where the melody vocals actually followed very much the guitar riffs, because I've heard bands doing like extreme vocal covers of early 80s metal records or songs, and basically they lose half the song because the melody is no longer there. And let's face it, I mean, most 80s metal or rock songs are rather basic chord progressions, and if you take away the melody, there's really a lot of the song lost. So I wanted something that I could actually perform in this extreme non-tonal vocal style without losing too much melodic content.
One of the aspects that I thought was really interesting from this EP, from the overall, now looking at the complete body of work, was you going with singing the tracks in Norwegian. I really felt that to me was the only way you could really express the emotional baggage that the songs have, and the cultural baggage that those songs have, is for you to do it in Norwegian. I felt like if you did it in English, the message would kind of get lost, or at least it wouldn't have the same emphasis. Was that the reason why you went with Norwegian?
No, it's again. So this is kind of like a challenge also from my wife. I did that. She challenged me to do something in Norwegian, and as I say, it really opened up a whole new creative way of expressing myself. I think from most of the people who have listened to the songs so far are of course not speaking Norwegian, so they don't understand the lyrics. But the feedback I've been getting, and that I guess I can relate to, is that it's perhaps even more aggressive than other recordings that I've done. Probably because of some of the articulate peculiarities of the language, but perhaps also a certain authority, in singing in my mother tongue rather than a foreign language. So and also it opened up an opportunity to play with words from Norwegian culture. There are some really very close to home references in the lyrical metaphors, that would be impossible to do in English. So it might not be the last time that I express myself in Norwegian, but for some reason I never really thought about that, how I've always written in English, but most probably just because all the music that I grew up on listening to was always in English. So this let's face it, metal is such a global, cultural phenomenon, that you can't really limit it to only a small language like Norwegian. But but for the purposes of this EP and a short format, that was kind of what I was touching on in the beginning as well. Like the title track, for example, which has very, very strong kind of folkish elements to it. Really inspired by just very loosely inspired by Harding fiddle phrasing and kind of voicings. And to be honest, I'm not really that big on folk music, but I have these certain aspects that I like, So, but if I envisioned a full album, I would never find a place for these kinds of riffs on an album, because I would feel in how I envision albums to have a certain balance, it would kind of stick out like a sore thumb. But for this particular project, it made total sense, and I could kind of get to explore that. And the same with some of these kind of lyrical phrasings and play with words and metaphors. It kind of opened up new possibilities that I probably would not have done if I envisioned it for an hour of music.
I can see that. I think the EP kind of removes the boundaries that you're perhaps more restricted when you're working on a full-length record, because you don't want a track in the middle of the album to feel like it doesn't belong there, that it cuts that line that goes all the way through the record. On an EP, you don't have those boundaries. You can pretty much do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and also it was particularly with this EP, it's one of the easiest that I've done in a long time, because everything was so familiar, with the guitar riffs and screaming vocals. It's kind of so second nature to what I do, and again, I would never have wanted to do a full album just in this kind of limited arrangement, but for the purposes of this, and also since all along it's kind of been a plan to extend the concept of the music on the EP into the live element. So it's also very much written to be played, live, and it also a part of the conceptual idea was, of course, also, I guess, subconsciously and consciously, that the industry, the way, the environment in which I work is so different, because I've had this 2-year cycle of releasing albums and playing shows, and another 2 years and another album, like most bands from those 80s and 90s generations have done.
Mm-hmm.
But these days I found myself like talking to you now. I'm in the studio. I've just been recording vocals for the second EP that is to follow this, while doing press for an EP that is not already out, and I'm also rehearsing that EP, to do my first live show with that, and I'm rehearsing with Emperor and doing these other things. So everything now happens at the same time. So it made total sense for me to kind of, since all these elements happen at the same time, to combine them together, to release new music and do specialized shows where I kind of focus on the aesthetics of this EP, instead of just trying to balance things that happen independently. I guess I try to combine the elements of my work environment a little bit.
You mentioned a little bit about the second EP. When I saw the press release and it mentioned that there was going to be a follow-up 5-track EP, the immediate question that I had was, are you going to continue in the vein that you started on this release, or is the second one going to go in at a very complete different approach?
Totally different approach. That was some of the again, for me to be able to limit myself as much as I've done on the first EP, to such a specific arrangement and aesthetics. There was always a plan to have the mirror side of that. So with this EP, I've been able to kind of go really back to my roots in such a zoomed in way, and for the second EP, it will go in the absolute other direction, where I will explore more of the experimental side of what I do, and the more unknown, I guess.
Yeah, it allows you to stay fresh and to kind of recharge your batteries in between full-length albums, doing something as different as these two EP releases will be, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess it's also it's not, so it's not a challenge as per se, because of course being able to do music for a living, through my whole life since I was a teenager, it's still, I have to pinch myself. I can't believe how lucky. No, but seriously, but and
I feel the same way. I can't believe I'm sitting here talking to you about this EP, so I need to pinch myself.
Well, but the thing is, the reason we have this passion for music, which I'm sure we both have, and but then again, we, at least, and I'm sure for you, as you've been doing this for a while, and you still want that excitement. So, or to put it in a different way, I think maybe one of the reasons I do, these different projects and try to reach out and expand, the palette of what I get to do, is also to just keep myself excited. I don't want to be repeating myself. I don't want, because that's not what engaged me in music, in the first place. I have this passion for exploring it, and kind of try to constantly widen my horizon and constantly try to do things better. So I just need to put myself in situations where I'm excited about doing it, because at the point where if I'm not excited about making music, I don't think I could ever make anything worthwhile that that people might find exciting listening to.
To listen to. Yeah, I can see that. I have one question to ask you about the EP, and then I have a couple of other questions, not necessarily related to the EP, but I just want to touch on the name Telemark. That's where you live. That's where you grew up. So there's definitely a deep connection to your roots of who you are as a person and as an artist on this EP. Do you feel that perhaps some of the tracks give a little bit of a glimpse behind the mask of the rock star of who you really are?
No, not necessarily. Do I have a mask like that? I wasn't No. I think Telemark, just coming from Telemark has been kind of an identity thing. I think even since the early Emperor days, I think people who come to Emperor shows, they will still hear our manager going on stage saying from Telemark, Norway, Emperor. So that's something that we've identified with since the beginning. Kind of this romanticized patriotism for where we come from, and not really from the culture or anything. It's just the Telemark spirit of things. And of course, you've probably seen all black metal, promo shots or whatever. It's in the forest.
Yeah.
It's in the Telemark nature. It's cold. It's harsh, but it's also really beautiful. But I think as a teenager, it was more of a romanticized idea. That was almost like a fantasy thing that, but still reflected, in our surroundings. But of course, I believe now that I've stayed here, and I think I've just grown into the role, and I've become so attached to this place and the nature here. And probably now that I spend so much more time also outdoors, in this environment, and probably also because in later years I have been traveling in more and more, in the capacity of my work, and it's not only homesickness, when I travel, but still it's that you become more aware of that sense of belonging. And I touched on these subjects on this album Arctis as well, with a song called My Heart Is of the North and stuff like that. That that sense of belonging. And now with this EP, I guess I just, as I said, zoom in even more.
Yeah, it allowed you to take a much deeper look into your own roots.
Yeah, and maybe just researching, maybe more how has this place and this environment, led to who I am. In which
It
a good
definitely.
sense.
I feel like we as people and yourself as a musician are definitely driven by the environment that surrounds you.
Absolutely, and probably more than sometimes we think we do.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's not patriotism in thinking that this is anything necessarily better than anywhere else, but it's more of as I said, as a deep-rooted sense of belonging and to become aware of the peculiarities of the spirit of the people here, the spirit of the of this part of the world, and how that has kind of become part of who I am.
Yeah, I see that in your music, and that leads me to, specifically with this EP, but I see that overall in your music, that deep connection. And that takes me to the next question, which I think you've answered this question just by listening to your music over the years. I think the answer is there, but I have to ask you this anyways. Everybody has their own definition of black metal, but to you, what is your own interpretation of black metal?
Well, I have been quoted to say that black metal is not a certain guitar sound or a certain way of screaming or anything, but it's an attitude. And as a reference to me, I can say the feeling I get from black metal, that definition. Of course, this is very abstract, but I can get that feeling from listening to Old Bathory, which is obvious. But I can still get the same feeling listening to Diamanda Galas or listening to early Omen soundtracks, for Jerry Goldsmith.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's something that probably is just defined within myself. And when I create, that's why, even though my music does not necessarily sound like what people associate with what black metal is, but to me it kind of still is, because that kind of abstract source within me from which I create, and that the goal, that abstract goal of what I want to achieve, of a feeling, of an atmosphere, that has kind of been a constant with me since I was a kid. So every new record or every new song is kind of just another attempt to, at the heart of it, to come closer to that kind of artistic ideal, if you will.
I have one more question for you. I don't want to take too much of your time, and I have to finish this chat that we're having by asking you a very simple question, but perhaps one that has a difficult answer. I don't know. You've worked with a lot of different artists over the time. Is there one specific artist that you haven't had a chance to collaborate with that you would absolutely would love to do something with?
Of course, I was asked this by a colleague of yours just half an hour ago. So, but more specific. No, but more specifically, because there's it comes up from the time to time, with this doing something with Rob Halford, and Rob Halford actually reached out to me back in 2000 or 2001 about doing something together, and it's kind of been something that we've briefly discussed from time to time over the years. But now recently, recent years, the Nurgle from Behemoth also kind of talked to Rob about the same thing. So the three of us have been discussing, finally getting to do something together. So that is absolutely in my kind of to-do list. Absolutely.
On your bucket list.
Absolutely. But in general, I have so much respect for for so many artists and musicians, but and I've had an insane privilege of collaborating with some of my really some of my idols. So but then again, I am being inspired by and influenced and respectful of does not necessarily mean that I would see myself that combining my efforts to theirs would necessarily be something great, because it's maybe the difference between the two that makes it great. So it's not something that I give much thought, because I'm so self-absorbed in trying to do what I do better than what I guess, as all of us, we are probably more aware of our shortcomings than what we do well. We focus on what we want to do better. So I still have a long way to go with my own stuff before I dig too deep into other people's.
Before you bring other people into the mix.
Yeah. No, but that's been something. The collab with Rob Halford, now, but also with Nurgle. I have had the opportunity to work a little bit with Nurgle because I'm doing vocals on one of the songs of his Me and That Man record. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool. But hopefully, and I'm kind of collaborating. I'm producing this solo record for Matt Heafy from Trivium.
From Trivium, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of involved with other things already. But
you have a full plate.
Very much so. A lot of things seem to be next 4 months that I would like to have had a full year to finish. That's just how it is.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you very much for taking the time today to sit with me and chat about your EP Telemark. For those that are perhaps living under a rock, it comes out February 14th. Yeah, go pick it up. It's an absolutely delight and a journey to go through those 5 tracks. And I'll keep my eyes open for the next EP that comes down the road. I know it's not going to be that far along. So thank you for the time. Thank you for doing this today.
Thank you so much for the support. Good talking to you. So
My
until
pleasure.
next time.
Until next time.